Alrighty. So I think we'll get started in just a moment here. So again, thank you everybody for joining. My name is David Barnett. I'm a support representative from Metalogix. And our topic for our quick take session today will be explaining some configuration options for the full discovery process that's available in our software. I wanted to kind of start off just by doing a brief introduction of the service itself, what kind of things we're looking to collect with our discovery process, and then to explain why some of these configuration options might be necessary in your situation. Any questions that you guys have, I'd be happy to answer, but go ahead and ask them throughout the session as well, but we'll wait until the end before I get back to you, and then we'll just kind of go through and take care of anything that hasn't been answered over the course of the session. So just to start, the control point discovery process, as I'm sure many of you have some familiarity with so far, essentially is our SharePoint crawl that pulls together a historic cache of data from your farm that both gives us information to make some of our reporting quicker, but also to allow us to do some reports that you might not have available otherwise from SharePoint itself. Some of these that you might see just using control point be things like any of our trend analysis reports. These will build up and be able to display changes in your environment over time for a few different categories that aren't captured by SharePoint out of the box there. So there's a bunch of different value adds there. We also will collect a lot of information about the permissions in your environment. Discovery specifically will go down for these site collection site levels and collect permissions to allow you to run several of our user permission reports off of data that we've already collected. It makes them much quicker, and will allow you to rapidly push out information that's relevant to you versus waiting for our API to crawl through SharePoint and pull those permissions again. This can be especially useful if you have a large scope that you want to report on, and a standard report just can't complete in a reasonable amount of time. Discovery also is the method that we use to collect information about our business administrators group. Anyone that wanted to have users access control point who aren't necessarily a site collection administrator or a farm administrator have the ability to add users that just have full control in a site somewhere to this business administrator group. And we discover where these users have permission with our discovery process. So until discovery is run, they won't be able to see in control point exactly what's available to them. There's numerous other bits and pieces of our product that utilize discovery, so it's definitely a vital process to keep running, to pay attention to, and to make sure it runs healthy. And as it is a crawl across your farm, it can be resource intensive and it can be time consuming. So it's definitely good to understand how to best set this up to work for you. So there's a couple of different ways that you can run the discovery job. The purpose of this session is more to cover the configuration options, so I'll just touch on these briefly. But you can set up a scheduled task on your server to run discovery at specific times off of one of our utilities. That's covered in the guide and might be a good option for one of our future quick takes. But we can come back to that later, and if any of you have questions, always feel free to shoot in a support case. You can run discovery on a small scope right through the interface just by clicking the Manage button and then the Discovery option. Oops, looks like we might need to reload. From here, we just change our selection. We can also see our last discovery date. This is valuable just to make sure everything's healthy. You'll get a notification right in the UI on the top left if discovery hasn't run in the last 24 hours or if discovery is currently running. From our selection here, just like with all of our reports, you can expand out and choose a smaller scope. So if we added, for example, a new business administrator or a new user with full control to our alpha team project, and we just wanted to make sure that they could use it right away instead of waiting for the discovery process to get back around the whole farm, you could add just that site in through the UI here, apply to save your selection, and run a quick discovery just on that small scope to make sure that your user could jump right in and start using control point. Or if you needed to make sure your reports were more accurate for that scope, you could also utilize this method as well. Traditionally, though, most of our discovery jobs for most of our customers are kicked off by our default process, which utilizes a timer job in SharePoint. That job is disabled by default when you install the latest build, version 5.3, but turning it on is very easy. You just come right into Central Administration. You can click under the Monitoring tab to check job status, and we'll sort by job definition, and then the Exceller Discovery job, which is the specific name for our discovery process, or the timer job at least. We open up our job, and you can see by default discovery will be set to start at some point after 3 a.m. This will give the SharePoint Analytics collection processes time to deposit their data so that we can grab that information. This also occurs after the nightly application pool recycle event that Control Point will do on a daily basis to make sure that everything's running smoothly. From this timer job, you can run discovery manually if you want, but we'll need you to go ahead and click the Enable button after your first install to make sure that this is set up and running properly. Some neat tricks with the timer job. If I just jump back to our front here, you can always check the status of your timer jobs through Central Administration. And if you notice that discovery hasn't completed in a while, let me pull that back up. One of the first things that support will always point you towards is just to check the status. You can click right on the failure, and you'll usually get an error message that's useful to our team, or may just show you right off the bat what may have happened. There's a number of different things that can interrupt the job in its process, and sometimes this can be a signal that you need to do a little bit more configuration to get discovery running successfully in your environment. Alrighty, so we've just covered basic options to set up and run discovery. A quick overview of what it affects in your environment. But as I mentioned, this process can be a little bit daunting for some of the larger farms that we'll run into. But even if you have a smaller farm, as we are using a decent amount of resources, you might want to configure this so that it has the most minimal impact possible in your environment. So where most of our configuration options are available for change is right through our configuration settings list. Through the UI and Control Point under the Manage tab, you can expand out the configuration settings. Oh, looks like I'm getting a little bit of a recycle here. Configuration settings page is also located by default right on the root of our site collection. So it'll be your server name 1818 or whatever you set up as the location for the Control Point configuration site. You'll expand out the Control Point settings list. Alrighty, and then we have here all of the core configuration settings that you'll regularly want to change for Control Point. Now, what's neat about this session is I'm doing this whole thing just from a browser connected to my server, but you actually don't need server access to set up a lot of these configuration options, and that's done by design to make sure that this is really accessible for our administrators, especially in some environments where there's a little more security around access to server or making changes on that environment as well. So just to start off, we'll just open. We've got our own full category just for discovery, and this is kind of the meat of why we wanted to have this session today, because we have a lot of questions come in to support regarding how to make this process work best for you. So just to run through these with a little bit of detail, just so you have a reference both for today and going forward. We'll start the abort discovery parameter here. Very cut and dry. If discovery runs into an error while it's running, it will abort the whole process. By default, this is set to false, and unless you have a really specific use case where you can't tolerate a single error during the process, we'd recommend you leave it on false as well. In a lot of cases, there may be a component or piece of your farm, small sections of corruption, different issues that we can run into, where 90% of your discovery or 99% could complete successfully, but we might have that one little hiccup, and that's something you can always go back in and look at a later time through our log file, the xadmin log. The discovery days option here is actually very useful. This is the maximum amount of days that we'll continue to collect sequential data for discovery before we give up and we start over. So if you have a small farm, maybe we can run every night without a problem. Or if you've made the right configuration options, maybe you can get that all into one day. In some of our larger environments, though, or environments where you can't afford to run discovery all day long, you might not be able to do everything in one day. And by default, this is set up to give you 3 days to run the entire process. If you're having trouble completing discovery in 3 days or the process doesn't seem to be working properly, one of the first things that we'll recommend in support is that you bump this value up to a number, maybe 10 days, just to find out and to set an initial benchmark of how long it takes to crawl the whole farm. And then we can come back and fine-tune settings within this option to make sure that discovery is doing its best for your environment. So again, that's 3 days is the default. That's usually a safe value. But if you're noting that discovery is running for a very long time, still doesn't seem to be completing after that 3-day period, go ahead and bump it up to something like 10 days and see if we can set an initial benchmark and get a first discovery completed. The next option here, discovery enabled, is an option that essentially will just hide a couple of the UI elements related to discovery if it's not enabled. As I mentioned in our most recent build for Control Point 5.3, discovery is disabled by default. So this will be false. So after you do that initial installation, just come in here and make sure it's true, and that will get all those reports bumped right into the user interface. The next option here, the discovery resume level. This is essentially related to when we reach the end of our first day or the maximum amount of time that we want to run, how quickly discovery will close down operations and wait for the next day before resuming. Setting the set option at 1 is the default, and this actually means that we'll finish the entire site collection that we're in before we'll shut down the discovery process. This can be a problem if you've run discovery for most of the day or you started it late in the day, because if you have a large site collection, we might not finish before that application pull recycle event, and that can cause some problems as you're interrupting discovery in a non-graceful manner. This is a value that, if you're having no problems completing discovery in a single day, it's completely okay to leave at the default. But if you need to configure it, bumping this up to something higher is useful. The highest you can do is 20, which essentially will cause it to stop right on essentially like a list item level, or sorry, a site level. And we'll cut off operations very quickly and make sure that you don't run over your time limit and push past that application pool recycle event that can cause some problems. So again, 1 being just the full site collection and 20 being a sub-site as your 2 options to fine-tune the discovery resume level. The discovery sleep feature was added just to give you an option to have any other processes that you might need to jump in while discovery is running. So if you have discovery running for 10 hours into business and you have some other background processes that you want to share some of these CPU cycles, you can crank this number up. This is a number in milliseconds. So 100 milliseconds is not much time. Discovery will definitely be resource hungry the whole time that it's cruising along, and if you want to make some space in between the process, you can increase this value. This is not one that we commonly change, definitely a very specific use case for this scenario. We'd rather see discovery running kind of full steam ahead at the most convenient hours for you, which we can configure. The discovery timeout option essentially is just the timeout to SQL. This is one that should be just fine unless you're seeing explicit SQL errors pop up in your log. And this is one that you probably won't need to change or use unless you have explicit directions from our support team, or you see a very clear error in the log file relating to a timeout for discovery reaching SQL. But in most cases where we're having that timeout, there's some other connection issues that are interfering with us. So a little more rare use case on that one. Our next option is the discovery discovery time restriction. This is the maximum amount of time that discovery will run from the time that it starts till the time that it stops. So by default, this is actually set to, this is in minutes. By default, this is set to 21 hours. I'm not sure their math 100% on there, but it's set to 21 hours of runtime, which will go right through your business day. If you're on an environment that has plenty of resources to spare, that might not be a problem for you. You may not feel the impact at all. If discovery does seem to affect SharePoint operations or control point operations, if you like to run reports throughout the day or you have a lot of users, then this might be a process that you want to make sure is stopped early in the day. Our farm here isn't too big. I've set discovery to run for 5 hours, so it starts at 3 a.m. and usually wraps up a little after 8 a.m. before most of our users get in and start using control point. And again, once this timer hits its end, discovery won't stop immediately. It will wait until it finishes whatever you've set as the discovery resume level for depth. So if you have a very specific time limit you want, you can also turn the resume level up to 20 and make sure that things are running exactly when you want them to run. The exclude web parts option essentially will prevent discovery from gathering data on web parts in your environment. These can be used for a cached web part report that control point contains. That's the only report that will push data from discovery, though, and you can run that report live. We added this parameter because web parts are in large part, there's a lot of custom ones added to SharePoint from third parties, and because they're the nature of them, there's a little bit more variation. We've run into issues traversing web parts that can take much longer and can greatly extend the overall runtime of the discovery process. Since they're only used for that one report, if it's not a report you commonly use, then we give you the option to exclude web parts by themselves from the discovery process. So setting this to true is the out-of-box setting, but you can change it to false if you wanted to make the cached option available on that one report that we have within control point. And then this is actually one of our great new features. It's been poking around in the product for a couple of versions, but it wasn't really pushed in until 5.3, this latest build, speed discovery. So what everyone's been kind of asking for, some optimization, some great improvements. And so we're happy to offer and describe this one for you. This one has a few different configuration options. Unfortunately, the description on the right here doesn't quite cover all of them. We ran out of space on the default page here. There's a lot of information in our configuration guide if you wanted to follow up on these configuration options. But just to briefly go over them, there's a few. The basic setting for these is you can do A, which will have us collect all of the activity data for the entire scope of discovery at the very end of the process, which we found saves quite a bit of time. So that will reduce the overall scope. That's A. Then we have this parameter PDA, which is the one that I use. This one is, in my opinion, one of the best ones that we've made available. This is not the out-of-box. The out-of-box is actually blank that will do a full discovery of everything. But PDA will gather only elements that have changed in your environment for all of the common categories. So that will include things like your business administrators, changes to them, changes in activity, changes in permissions, but it will not climb back through and look at each item that we've already put into the cache. You also have an option with the speed discovery to eliminate caching business administrators. So if that's not a feature that you're using, you can do a different parameter, one like DAR. That parameter will ensure that no business administrators are being captured, but we're still taking advantage of all of these improvements to speed, and we're only collecting the changes that have occurred in the environment. I don't want to run over all of those. There's probably about 5 or 6 different parameter options that you have in the speed discovery. Those are all right in the configuration guide if you just search for speed discovery. And I'll bring that guide up just at the end just to show you guys where you can find that information. But there are a few different options there, so you can really customize things the way that you'd like them to be. Then we have the last 2 options here are just exclusionary options. You can essentially enter either the URL of site collections that you do not want to discover or the web application GUID web applications that you do not want to discover. The case for these may be something like you have a large team site web application and you're not as interested in collecting information about those team sites, and you've also noticed that those are greatly increasing the overall runtime of your discovery, and so you'd rather have discovery complete in one day and not collect data about your team sites and be completely accurate on everything else than run for 3 or 4 days to finally enumerate all of the items in that team site web application. So we give you the option here to go and capture, but again, just to point out, this one needs to be the GUID, which you can pull out in control point fairly easily just by checking the properties for a web application. And this can just be the URL of the site collection. Oh, looks like my instance here is looping a little bit on me. Just refresh my browser. This is our properties report. Just right-click properties. Way down there we find our web application ID. There's your GUID. You could just cut and paste that if you wanted to eliminate my publishing portal. I like to discover that one though, so I wouldn't put that in there, but you just add that to that WAP exclude, and that will cause discovery to skip right over that option. So I've thrown a lot of configuration options at you there. I did just want to make sure we had a quick overview of those. The two other components that I wanted to point out on this brief session that can help with the performance of your discovery when you're trying to configure it to run its best is a couple of options we have under our application performance category here. The two that are in here is our max parallel procs and our parallel procs option. Max parallel procs is a feature that was added to control point to allow us to essentially process in parallel more than one site collection at a time or site. This by default is set at 2, but you're actually encouraged to raise this to the number of cores available on your server. That should greatly increase your overall performance. Now keep in mind, from the support side, we do sometimes see issues pop up trying to jam all of that data into our database at once. If you have 4, 6, 16 cores and really beefy server, you can see errors pop up relating to that. The most common troubleshooting step that we recommend is just turning the parallel processing off for the discovery side of things. This affects both reports and actions. And so we have this parameter following up called parallel procs. This option allows you to specify which pieces of control point use this parallel processing. So I've selected AR, which is actions and reports, but I've left off D, which would be for discovery. So my discovery runs without parallel processing currently. You're welcome to include it, but I'm able to get through my whole farm without errors with this current setup. You can choose to just include discovery, though, and remove actions or reports, or to include all three. By default, this field's blank, and we'll use parallel processing on everything. So those are the primary configuration options that I wanted to cover with you guys today. That should give you enough information to go in and start fine-tuning discovery to work best for your environment. Just before I jump into questions, I just wanted to point out, if you guys need to check out any kind of information on discovery and you wanted to follow up or check out something like that speed discovery and all of its parameters, if you jump under the support tab, we have their control point documentation and our troubleshooting guide. And here we can just look for speed discovery. All of these parameters I covered are mentioned in here in one way or another. Most of them have their own category. But here we go over all of the sub-items for speed discovery one at a time, all the parameter options. So you can have your best option. There's PDA. This is the one that I use in my environment and that I usually recommend for clients, as this covers all the normal things that a discovery will look at, but takes advantage of some of these new performance features that we've put in. Alrighty. So as I mentioned, those are the main things that I wanted to look at today with you guys. I'd be happy to check in, see if we have any questions that have been submitted so far. If anyone else has a question, though, please feel free to submit it this time. Alrighty, so, sorry about that. Just took a second to pull this open. Just for some of the questions that we had here, I think John was helping out asking some of these. Let's see. So is there a way that we can have the discovery send a completion email without creating a separate job? Currently, there is not a method in Control Point to have discovery automatically send a completion email when it finishes. But this is a process that is usually built where you can configure it, watch it for the first couple of days, and then just as you use Control Point, we put right into the interface a warning message if discovery is not running successfully, right on the top here. And you can always check in central administration if you're concerned that things aren't working properly to see if that timer job is normally starting. Next question I have here, the name of the scheduled discovery job. So that one is the Exceller discovery job. We still have the Exceller label attached to that one, but that will be what you'll find in timer jobs in all versions of SharePoint as the title for the discovery job. And you can absolutely change the time that this runs. This value is totally flexible. And again, it's just the timer job will fire from SharePoint and kick off the process on the server where Control Point's installed. So you can set this anytime you want. Just keep in mind that if you set it in the evening, the application pool is usually scheduled to recycle each night. And so you may only have a few hours left before that event happens, and that will interrupt discovery in a harsh way that isn't usually the best practice. So we like to do it right in the morning. The application pool events already happened for Control Point, and SharePoint's finished collecting all of its nightly data as well. And I think that's all the questions that I currently have. Alrighty, yeah, so if there are no other questions, I think that'll conclude our session for today. But I, again, want to thank everyone for joining. And as always, if you have any questions or follow-up, feel free to either shoot an email to email_support@metalogix.com, or you can call in at 202-609-9100. Thanks again. I'll let you guys all go, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you.